Right, good evening. It is 7:45, or 5:45, so I would like to call this meeting to order at 5:45. Dr. Weeks, can we please have a Pledge of Allegiance?
Be happy to. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And can we please have roll call?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Sorry, my system is just being a little slow right now. Susan Benjamin? Louisa Stark? I see that she's there, but I don't see anything on there. Leanne Elmy?
Present.
Elora Diaz?
Present.
Carmen Trujillo?
Present.
So everybody's present?
Thank you. Somebody's feedback is on. So if we're not speaking, put yourself on mute just so. There we go. Okay.
This is Susan Benjamin. I'm having a hard time hearing anybody. It's all greeny, so I'm not sure you call my name or not. I can't tell.
Yes, we called you, Mrs. Benjamin, and you're coming across grainy as well.
I can't hear you. I'm gonna have I've got something that says low system resources are affecting my audio quality, so I'm gonna have to figure this out. So go ahead. Just know I'm here.
Sometimes it helps, Mrs. Benjamin, to turn off your video. Okay.
All right. We're going to go ahead and move on to community communications at this point. And we will set, or Dr. Weeks, how many cards do we have?
We have 10, but would you like to adopt the agenda for this evening first before we move on?
Can I please have a motion to adopt the agenda?
This is Lene Almy. I'll second.
Okay. Are there any questions or discussion?
Who made the motion?
Carmen Trujillo.
Thank you.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, say nay. Okay, with that, the motion passes, and we'll move on to community communications.
Yes, Dr. Diaz, we have 10 community communications, and I would like for the board to help me welcome Amanda Esmeralda to the board meeting this evening. She is our new board secretary, and she has been with Ms. Sinclair, I think, a couple of meetings, but this is her first meeting with us solo. So welcome, Amanda.
Welcome, Amanda. We're going to go ahead and put 3-minute time limits on the community communications.
So Amanda, do you have all 10 of the community communications emails?
Yes, sir, I do.
Perfect. So whenever you're ready.
Okay, so the first one is from Cindy, which reads, "Thank you for reading my comments. My name is Cindy Canton, and I am a member of the Phoenix community. I have been an administrator in another Phoenix district for 20 years. In the past 2 years, we did not receive a grant for an SRO. We finally received one this year. I wanted to share why I believe the program is so important. Although it is unusual for a person who doesn't work for your district to speak about a program in your school, especially when we are in competition for these grants. I feel very strongly about keeping the program with the City of Phoenix. The SRO program is a positive bridge between students and the community and our local police force. I firmly believe that if people were better informed about the program, they would welcome these highly trained officers onto the campuses who are able to create positive relations with the students and community. Speaking from someone who lost a grant for 2 years, I can say without a second thought, this is a wonderful program for the kids, families, and schools. In the last 2 years, I have called Crime Stop more often than in my 18 years. And although I find our beat officers easy to work with, they don't know our students and they don't have time to spend with students, and families. So instead, a report is written and many students end up in court or diversion. With an SRO, the goal is to keep the kids out of court or diversion. Instead, teach them the law, work with families, students, and schools to get them help, find services, and ultimately help the students choose a better path. I have seen firsthand the change in students. Oftentimes, I will walk into a classroom, now a virtual classroom, where our SRO is presenting and they are like a rock star. Our students are so happy to be able to ask questions from the officers in a safe environment. I have witnessed families come in with a crisis in the neighborhood, scared to report, and grateful for the SRO whom they know. I would encourage everyone to talk to the SROs, the program coordinator, and ADE, and others who have worked with this program. Ask questions of them and the program so that everyone has a better understanding of the purpose of the program, especially now. Wouldn't it be a shame if the students and community lost out on an opportunity to have a positive interaction with the police? I hate to see all our Phoenix districts lose such a valuable program to other cities. Speaking from someone who worked very hard to get the grant, I, Cindy Canton, sincerely hope you will keep the program. SROs are such a proactive member of the community. Thank you for your time, Cindy Canton, another day in an unpredictable world. The second one is from Aaron Friedrich.
Amanda,
Good morning.
I think it's a little hard to hear you. I don't know if you might be on speakerphone, but if you could speak up a little bit, that would be helpful.
Okay, perfect. The second one reads from Aaron Friedrich. Good evening, governing board members. My name is Aaron Friedrich, and I am speaking on behalf of PECTA as a co-president. Today, I would like to address the action of terminating the agreement with the school resource officers. After reviewing the survey sent to families and staff, PECTA believes that in order to continue our district support of Black Lives Matter, it is only appropriate that we continue to research and survey on this topic. As research would show, schools with SROs often see higher rates of exclusionary discipline and more often target students of color. PECTA has been encouraged by the work you all put in making strong Black Lives Matter statements. This topic of SROs is the next step in continuing that support to other schools and most importantly to our students. Now, it is your opportunity to ensure that our students are staffed and disciplining in anti-racist ways. Information on SROs was found at https://wnzerotolerance.org. Thanks, Aaron Friedrich. The third is from Felina Rodriguez. Superintendent Winks and governing board members. I am Felina Rodriguez, a new PECTA educator to our district with the background of culturally relevant social justice education and proud product of Arizona Public Schools. I want to address the agreement regarding school resource officers and why the agreement must end permanently. The now former SRO of Isaac Middle School pepper sprayed a crowd of students, several of which were in my class. The next week, the same officer handcuffed a 6th grade girl, of which I was informed by 2 students who witnessed the incident. I received retaliation and isolation from the union representatives and coworkers who justified the officer's response because they, quote, "we lack the resources," and because children, quote, "need to be taught a lesson." I was told by the principal that the officer could act in this way in order to protect school property. I experienced gaslighting and intimidation from the district leadership and was forced into meetings without representation to be told that the district does not have the capacity to hold SROs accountable as they report to the city of Phoenix. I was told that because parents came and spoke in support of the officers after these incidents happened, I had to let the matter go, which I didn't. It was for these reasons I left the Isaac School District. I learned later that the officer's supervisor came into my classroom to tell my students why pepper spraying them was justified. Meanwhile, another officer muttered a racial slur under his breath only to be heard by a student. Eventually, these incidents were blown over, normalizing the cynical violence of policing in our nation. How can an educator or you as a district leadership live with the fact that the most violent police force in our nation is in our schools? That they are held accountable by their own internal system, and when teachers like me and community organizations speak out against the institutionalized violence, Phoenix Law Enforcement Association and their supporters target us, bully us, and degrade us with slurs that I won't repeat. Police institutions have historical roots in white supremacy, specifically slave patrol. Mandated schooling has been used as a colonizer tool to assimilate Black, Brown, Indigenous identities into Eurocentric American society. Anti-racist actions is not politically popular and will never have a full community support until we have the educators and community members recognize the roles of policing in maintaining white supremacy, and even how we go through our actions have maintained it. SROs create an illusion of safety, but are not legally required to prevent mass shootings as seen in the fallout of the Parkland shooting legal battles. I direct you to a study conducted by ACLU, which highlights the illusion of safety while highlighting.
We're over time, so if you wanted to wrap up, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. The next one is from Maureen Burris regarding SROs. Hello and good evening, Madam President and members of the board. My name is Maureen Burris, and I love being a 3rd grade teacher at Lowell Elementary School. I love this district more than anything, and I love my students, whom I affectionately refer to as my nuggets. Each year, I promise those nuggets that no matter what, my classroom and our campus community is a safe place. I am writing to you tonight to ask you to help me keep the promise and not to take advantage of a grant that would bring resource officers to our campuses. As a former social worker, I feel confident making the assertion that the safest communities do not have more policies, more police, they have more resources. I want to start by taking a moment to thank the social workers, nurses, psychologists, and my fellow teachers who are at the schools, first responders to students who are ill, under immense stress, traumatized, homeless, facing food scarcity, or a combination of all these things. These individuals, as well as the various mental health agencies who partner with some of our schools, are the people whom data is proven to provide positive outcomes for our students. Thank you all sincerely. Speaking of data, here is what I currently Here is what the current data on the state of students' mental health is telling us today. Between 2006 and 2016, the suicide rate among ages 10 through 17 increased 70% per the CDC. Before they are 18 years old, nearly 72% of the students in this country will experience major trauma in the forms witnessing violence in the home, experiencing abuse, or the death of a loved one. Some of you may be thinking, well, our school social workers and psychologists are all currently under ratio, and that may be, but I feel compelled to respond to our current ratio, and our current ratios are minimum requirement. Our schools and our communities are most important for our students needing mental health professionals. I'll go ahead and skip a few to save on time. I know there are families and school staff within our district who love the SROs on their campuses. I have held growling reviews of some of them I have heard. Still, I do not believe a couple of positive examples is enough to outweigh the several negative reports. It does not soothe my fears to hear that there are some good ones. If I handed you a bowl of M&Ms and told you that only one was poisoned, how likely would it be that you eat a handful? Finally, the most important and precedence of police in the schools is tied to the malevolence and fear of desecration. Black and Latino students are more likely to attend schools where there are SROs, be referred to law enforcement, and are more likely to face violence consequences as a result. I am having a hard time comprehending how districts who just asserted the support of Black Lives Matter and committed to anti-racist actions would weeks later consider bringing police into our schools. It isn't wrong, it is betrayal. Before you vote tonight, I hope you will think about our students and what they really need to succeed. I have faith that you will do right by them. Best of luck, sincerely, Marine. The fifth one comes from Carmen Terrell regarding resource officers in schools. I think more counselors and mentors are needed in the schools rather than these resource officers, because enforcement of zero tolerance for violence, bullying, and weapons needs to be done. I was asked by Jasmine from Kate Hoffman's office. She's supposed to call me back, but I never did. But anyways, I'm telling you all, I told this to her. This is like we are a citizen. It's like we are citizens should be when we see stuff going on by the police. Record what's going on the phone and see if a person or the officer needs help. In schools, phones can't be used, but more cameras and footage needs to record what goes on with the students and teachers when stuff goes on. So time to improve the cameras and footage so things are viewed much clearer. So if a weapon is used, zero tolerance rules apply, and time to expel the student, but also provide the caretaker of the child with resources to get help, as well as other options for students to attend school. As far as fighting and bullying, it depends on how that's done, because usually a student would need to talk to a counselor or mentor. So having them on site would make things easier. But once again, send home resources to get counseling and mentors. Having a mentor and counselor on site at schools will help much better than a resource officer, because students have their own issues to deal with within themselves. But to be treated inhumanely is unacceptable. A lot of times temporary insanity comes into play when some situations happen. So who better to handle this? A counselor? The caretaker of the student shouldn't be blamed for the stuff the student did. Also, because it is not right blaming them, because one can't control another person's mind. So that's why too, the counselors help to identify the cause of the problem. So the bottom line, take the officers out and put mentors and counselors in. Carmen Terrell. Number 6 comes from Reverend Quanta Cruz, who is a parent. This comment is regarding the criminalization of the behavior and choice of students. One bias can impact our interpretation of behavior or the thought process behind a behavior. There is no repercussions for a staff member who interprets a child's behavior, especially once a child has an out-of-school suspension. Children have make bad choices, but criminalization of a child is harmful and can lead to the dimming of the child's light and views of themselves. It also has a potential to change how other children who witness the adult's behavior treat the child who has made the poor choice. African American students are 7.5% of the student population, but are given 20% of the out-of-school suspensions, and that is with SROs in schools. Madison School District has similar situation and no SROs in place. So exactly what is the play here? If more adults are needed and help support children making poor choices or children who need restorative services when it comes to behavior, wouldn't it be wise to seek professionals that can help with that? My goal is to give a different perspective. Think about your goal as the SRO funding and if there is another way to use it. Another way to reach our goal without criminalizing the behavior of young budding minds. Also, please advise how the SPED program will move forward during the pandemic. Thank you. Our seventh community comment comes from Jay Barbato. Good evening, Dr. Weeks, governing board members, members of the cabinet, and those watching at home. My name is Jay Barbato, and I'm the mighty proud co-president of PECTA. Tonight, it seems as if decisions will be made on having school resource officers in our school. Even though I am strongly against the idea, the police officers in schools, I request that we need to hear from the community. In all honesty, the surveys sent out by the district aren't fair or anonymous. I can legitimately look at every single person's response in both the community and educator. Everyone can do the same thing as well. How can we consider this data legitimate if people don't have the chance to speak freely? We can't just take some data hastily put together and make decisions based off of that. We need more voices of parents, educators, community partners, and most importantly, the students. I know the district listens to its educators. I think it's time to let the students have their say as well. Please consider tabling this decision until we truly know how our community feels. Our eighth is from Dr. Ronnie Petrie to the board president, Dr. Elora Diaz, board members, Dr. Weeks, and cabinet members. Good evening. I am Dr. Ronnie Petrie, the principal at Bethune School. I am in Phoenix, Arizona. I am writing on behalf of the principals who had an SRO assigned to their campus. We are aware of the issue that are being expressed regarding police officers. However, for record, we have had positive experiences with SROs on our K-8 campuses. The SROs have built positive, long-lasting relationships in our schools and are being expressed regarding police officers. However, for the record, the SROs have built positive, long-lasting relationships in our schools and the surrounding communities of which they serve. The SROs have helped establish safe learning environments at our schools, providing safe walking to and from campuses, and have prevented vehicle pedestrian accidents in our communities. The visibility of security resource officers have kept our schools safe from drugs, human trafficking, pedophiles placed in the neighboring communities, and bullying. Principals are given the authority to control discipline on their campuses, which include checking backpacks, retrieving illegal substances, weapons on our campuses, and many other duties. The officers are here to assist when necessary with limitations. We hope that the safety grant will be accepted to continue the great relationship between schools, families, and the police department. Thank you. Number 9 is from Latoya Jones, regarding SROs and PESD. Good evening, President Dr. Diaz, Governing Board, and Superintendent Weeks. I am writing as both a staff member and a mother of 3 students in the district. I have many concerns about the effectiveness of the school resource officers or SROs on our campuses. I question whether presence of these officers on the campuses does indeed make them safer after a deadly shooting in Columbine High School nearly 20 years ago. The number of SROs grew. However, there was no evidence to show that expanding law enforcement and adding SROs actually results in safer schools. In fact, in schools predominantly attended by students of color, which are our schools in the district, there are even more conflicting studies about effectiveness of these officers in schools. The data shows higher rates of suspensions, expulsions, and arrests that funnel kids into the criminal justice system. While I understand the desire to strengthen the community ties with law enforcement, I do not want it to be at the expense of my children, our children. There are boarding mistrust between communities of color and the police, and not without cause. The racial uprising that began in late May and early June are carrying on still today and reignited as the world watched in horror as the strong arms of law enforcement unjustifiably murdered a Black man. As a parent, I would appreciate more resources poured into our social workers and programs that foster community and justice. Might even consider what Phoenix Union High School District has done, which is using law enforcement as needed for community safety needs, assigning officers not to individual schools, but to the district. Our nation has garnered global attention as the Black Lives Matter movement brought more awareness to systematic racism and police brutality. I would like our district to be on the right side of history in this respect. Thank you for your time and consideration. Best regards, Latoya Jones, mother and educator. And the 10th one is from Chico Robinson regarding SROs in the schools. Hello, Madam President, and members of the board. I hope you and your families are healthy and safe. My name is Chico Robinson, and I am a proud public school educator and serve my position as Vice President of PECTA with honor, respect, and pride. It is my privilege to teach social studies with the 7th and 8th grade students at Kenilworth Elementary School, the school that is turning 100 years old this school year, and the school that taught my grandmother and Senator Barry Goldwater. I honor the legacy, the educators, and the students that have come before me in best advocates I can. I think it is important to have a serious conversation about the safety of our students. Increases in SRO staffing have been suggested as a possible solution to our security and safety issues. SROs could be an important component of school safety, but reform must include school counselors and mental health professionals. More SROs can perpetuate the school to a prison pipeline, especially for our students of color. In addition, class sizes and academic achievements are better predictors of school safety and student success. I would ask that our district take a different approach that would better serve our students at Phoenix Elementary School District. Thank you, Chico Robinson.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you, Amanda. I just want to let our community know that we are not allowed to respond to community communications, but we do appreciate the time that you took to share your thoughts and your concerns and your questions. So at this time, we will go ahead and move on to item C1, and that is receiving, discuss, and take possible action on the agreement with the City of Phoenix for school resource officers. We have a presenter tonight, Dr. Elizabeth Anthony. Thank you so much for being able to present to our community with such short notice. We don't have a bio for you, so if you wanted to begin your presentation with sharing just a little bit more about yourself and your familiarity with this topic, that would be awesome. Thanks.
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Elizabeth Anthony, and I'm an associate professor at the ASU School of Social Work. And my background is both in child welfare and juvenile justice. So my interest is working on preventing young people from getting into systems of care and what we can do to promote resilience among young people who have already been involved in systems of care. So resilience is my real research area of interest. So I did see the call for comments, and because I have a background in this area, I thought it might be helpful to share some resources. So I will run through this PowerPoint pretty quickly, but would be happy to answer questions. And some of the comments from parents have already been reflected in some of the things I will present now. But my idea for this presentation was that we not look at it as a black and white issue in terms of whether we do or don't go ahead this year, but we think about it as we do need to respond this year, but also what would we want it to look like if we did have a program that was proactive and innovative. So just for people's background, oh, and I forgot, I can't control it. So actually, Troy, would you mind? Thank you. So just briefly, I'll go over the definition of school resource officers, kind of the history of where they came from, the research on the impact of SROs, which is what most people are really interested right now. And then community perspective. So people have already spoken, and I regularly am keeping track of what the children and youth say. My area is really for youth, but also what parents and caregivers are think about this issue. And then of course, principals and teachers who I respect and who are overwhelmed, I know right now. And then I'll end with some recommendations from schools, for schools based on the research literature. So this is a research presentation, but I also at the end have included some resources. So one of the comments was about the ACLU, and I have a link to that article on the final page of the presentation. So essentially, I've reviewed this literature. There's no universal definition of what an SRO is and what their responsibilities are. So it varies dramatically. So some SROs in large cities are responsible for metal detectors, for securing the safety of the school, and also for keeping track of kids who are misbehaving. On the other end, some SROs are simply securing the perimeter of a school and are not as involved in terms of mentorship programs or anything like that. The programs that take place in the law enforcement, sworn law enforcement schools is the official definition, but the United States of Justice defines the school resource officers as sworn law enforcement officers responsible for safety and crime prevention in schools. So these are individuals trained as police officers and who are also carrying guns and have the ability to arrest children. So the job duties and trainings of SROs really vary by jurisdiction, which has been problematic when we try to really measure the success of these programs. So they vary considerably from state to state. Next slide would be great. Thanks, Troy. So the use of school police actually dates back to the 1950s. But originally, school police were conceived as a proactive control for crime. So they were not intended to be concerned with arresting children, but more how do we prevent crime? How do we inform kids about what is criminal procedure? And something that I think is great is how do we help mentor young people and how to respond when they are involved with the police officer, what's their best approach. So it was more of a mentorship model. What happened, as everyone knows, is the increase in school violence, in particular, some of the highly publicized school shootings really showed an increase or exponential growth in SROs. The other increase in SROs has been due to the funding programs that were put in place to provide grants to local jurisdictions. So some of those examples are COPS and Safe and Drug-Free Schools Community Acts. And these funds were typically limited to SROs and not able to translate to more community-based options or counselors. Next slide's great. So the research on the impact of SROs, one of the biggest challenges we have to evaluation is that most of it is anecdotal. So what we have heard parents sometimes say is, well, we feel safer when there's an SRO. There has really been no solid studies that really study the impact. So I'll show you some of them. The ones cited here, and these are all referenced at the end. Terrio and Orm investigated the role of SROs in terms of the feelings of safety for kids at school. And what they found is actually SROs, the interacting with SROs was unrelated to feelings of safety. So in fact, Black students and victimized students tended to feel less safe in the presence of an SRO, while schools our kids who were already well connected to school or had a positive connection with school felt safer. So there was a disparity there. Another study by Bailey suggests that the quasi law enforcement role complicates security and search issues. So they are police officers, but because of their quasi role being in the school and not, some SROs are monitored by the police department, some by the school, they have more opportunity to search without probable cause or use of a warrant, which is problematic. Next slide. So what is the role of SROs in affecting students' right to feel safe and respected? Well, youth are generally more critical of police than adults. Police presence can be perceived by some as an indication of a problem. So if there's an officer on campus, we might think, well, there must be something going on at that campus if there's a police officer there, even if they never engage with the SRO themselves. Brown felt, 2005, found most students felt that SROs did a pretty good job, but they were less supportive of actually increasing the number of SROs. One other study found that students felt safer, but they did find the SROs to be unnecessarily aggressive at times. And this is generally by Black and Hispanic students. Next slide. Okay, so let me move the screen here. So what we have seen in the literature is that they call it the criminalization of student conduct. So the growing number of students arrested at school and introduced to the juvenile justice system is one of the big concerns about the use of SROs. So there is mounting evidence that students are being arrested for minor and less serious behavior because of the presence of an SRO. And that discipline problems historically handled by school principals and teachers are now being handled by SROs. So part of that problem is that even though teachers and principals are overwhelmed, they know kids really well within their school, and the SRO may or may not. The other issue that has come up in the research literature is that regular suspicion and harassment could use some more vulnerable school students to actually drop out of school. So if students feel that they are being constantly asked if they have something, if they have drugs on them by the SRO, it may be less appealing for them to come to school. Another finding is that it's very stigmatizing, and one of the parents or teachers mentioned this. It's very stigmatizing to be arrested in front of your peers. So I have seen a very young child arrested in front of the school and put in a police car in handcuffs with his peers watching. And that is a highly stigmatizing event that doesn't necessarily need to be happening at school. So this leads to other kids watching that and starting to be concerned, is that going to happen to me? What's going on? And then that student is going to have a very hard time coming back to school. The deployment of SROs is happening largely in schools with large minority populations. So within our district, we can see which schools are using SROs and which schools are not. The deployment of the SROs tend to be schools that have a higher percentage of Black youth, which can exacerbate the disproportionate targeting of minority youth. Next slide. Okay, great. So now I wanted to continue on some more national studies. So in a national study, because this is really the best research evidence we have on the topic, some authors found that when looking at minor misbehavior, Black and Hispanic students were more likely to be disciplined than were their white peers. In a national review of SROs in public schools, minority students with disabilities, especially those with emotional behavior disorders, and this was mentioned by a parent, are also at increased risk of exposure to adjudication for behaviors that are more well treated by a social emotional expert, counselor, or someone of that nature. People are probably already familiar, but there's a very large body of research that documents the effects of school disciplinary practices on Black males. So Black females have been more recently studied, and the disproportionate impact of school disciplinary policies and practices are also having a negative impact on Black girls. So meaning by disproportional, that Black and males and Black girls are more likely to be disciplined for the same behavior than their white peers specifically. Next slide's great. So the question everybody wants to know, do SROs make schools safer? Unfortunately, we don't have a clear answer to this question because we have very limited data. So the schools have not kept track of the data differences in schools with SROs and not in terms of violence. Terrio, however, did find that schools with an SRO had lower rates of arrest for weapons and assault than schools without an SRO, but significantly higher rates of arrest for disorderly conduct. So they were good on some of the big issues, but then the problem is then still very, very significantly high rates for things that the kids should not be arrested for. The other point that teachers and parents may make is that they anecdotally feel that SROs do make schools safer. So there's mixed evidence. There's no clear answer to this question. One thing that is important to point out is that in most, if not all, of the major school shootings, there was an SRO present and the school shooting still occurred. Next slide, please. So I'd like to move now to community perspectives because this is where kind of my heart is. So for children and youth, juveniles are really a vulnerable population. They often don't have enough power or feel that they have enough power to demand respect for their rights. So they may also not be able to cognitively understand their own rights, in which case when they're faced with a situation, unlike an adult who can say, I know my rights, I can't be arrested for this, or I want to see more documentation, many children won't have that ability, and they don't have legal presence or representation when these arrests happen. The other thing to note is that many children in schools, and we know this more and more, have trauma experiences that present as behavior at school, but we know from the research literature, trauma is most effectively treated with social emotional support and consistency from the people in their personal life and also at school. So it's a great opportunity for schools to provide safe environments for trauma exposed students, and it's the relationships that they have with teachers and principals are essential. Next slide. So the three strongest protective factors against adverse experiences that can be cultivated in school are strong relationships with an adult. So of all the research literature, when we talk about kids who are successful or able to persist against all odds, they have one person at least in their life who believes in them. And so if this could be a well-trained SRO who's a mentor, great. But it could be a number of other people, and it's often teachers, mentors, coaches, other people. And learning good cognitive skills and the ability to regulate their emotions is something we teach. So our social workers are doing these interventions in our schools right now. And I know they are limited on their resources, but they do a great job. Schools are children's communities, right? They spend more time at school, maybe not now, but normally, than they do at home. But we can only help children recover if we have people intervening with them, especially those who are really traumatized, by staff who really understand the impact of trauma. And we have a number of free trauma resources that you can find on my webpage for teachers and parents. Let's see, so yeah, I think I covered this already. So we could move on to the next slide. So parents and caregivers, all of us, are concerned for the safety and well-being of the children while in school. We send our kids with a prayer as we drop them off, because we know it's a difficult environment, both in terms of how they have to interact with peers and the things that can happen. The school shootings and other highly publicized events raise our fears, but we can't move forward on fear. So none of us can, and we're trying not to move forward on fear with the COVID virus. And I think we should be not moving on fear when it comes to something like this. So while parents might be excited about the opportunity of someone having as their primary job to pay attention to the safety of the school, we can't guarantee by our contracts, the way they're currently written, that is all the SRO will do. So if the SRO could really just do that, or do something else that we could help shape, that would be fine. But we don't tend to have control over that. The other issue is that parents may see that it's not their own child who's the threat, but they're concerned about someone else's child. Well, research suggests that who is perceived as a threat is highly racialized. So who do we think is the problem child based on school discipline procedures and people's perception is very highly racialized. And that's something we need to both educate our parents on as well. Next slide. So for principals and teachers, you have an enormous responsibility to ensure the safety of children in schools, and we send our kids with trust that you do, and often with very limited support for programs that would actually help. And this is something we should all be lobbying for, more resources. Prevention programs are often the first to get cut. The use of SROs, I understand, can add another adult to the school environment who might take pressure off of teachers so they can deal with their mission, which is to teach children. But again, unfortunately, teachers know children best and they know what they need best. And so I think that while I don't want them having to deal with high-level behavior problems, and those can be dealt with a different way, many of the behaviors that they deal with are things that they're trained to deal with. Behavioral and emotional social supports are limited, and school social workers and school psychologists are really in demand. And I would like to see us getting more support for them because they're doing this work and they know how to intervene with kids. But I know the biggest problem is that the funds for SROs can't just be translated. It's not flexible funds, which is really unfortunate. And so I can understand a principal or teacher perceiving, well, if there's a big major happening on campus, if we have an SRO, we can say, well, we had this to try to prevent what happened. Again, in the big shootings that have happened across the nation, the SROs have not always been able to prevent that from happening. Next screen. So just to wrap up, recommendations for schools. So, you know, SROs have some pretty tough research in terms of the lack of support for their effectiveness and major concerns about how they impact kids differentially. So if we were to move forward with the SRO program, it would require extensive training for everybody to be able to reduce the negative outcomes associated with introducing SROs at school, and also to increase the potential safety and security benefits. So there are possible security and benefits. And I have known a few SROs who are very well trained who would be welcome to participate in this kind of intervention. But unfortunately, there's not consistency across the board. And then we really need formal governance documents or MOUs that should be created to be clear about the responsibilities divided between SROs, school administrators, and teachers. Without that, we don't have anything to go by. If a school resource officer kind of goes on their own way, we don't have any defense against that. Next slide. So frequent opportunities for both formal and informal communication would be needed, both between the school SROs and administrators, to make sure that we are recognizing the potential for violating students' rights and that we keep that at the forefront of the conversation. In some of circumstances, and you can unfortunately see these by Googling this topic, some kids have had some very difficult experiences, such as a girl being strip searched at school because someone believes she had guns on her person. So these are violations of kids' basic rights. So we need to keep that in the forefront. So my recommendation is a task force that would involve experts from the community and everyone here, but also experts on this topic and the youth voice. So particularly, I would like to see Black and Hispanic males and girls who could be consulted about what they really believe is needed to help keep their school community safe. Next slide. So these are the references for all of the research. The first one that you see there is the one I was talking about, where a colleague and I have created free modules for teachers, parents, that you can access online to learn more about some of these issues. And they're under the category of child well-being. And then if you could just scroll to the final end, Troy, that would be helpful. So then I put some media resources here. So the ACLU blog that someone referenced earlier, and some other, the Awatuki article about Phoenix High School making the decision to discontinue their contract with SROs. So unfortunately, not a clear decision, but I think these are the main things we should be thinking about if we're going to move forward with a school resource officer program. So I'd be happy to entertain questions.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony. I appreciate the well-rounded presentation here to discuss both sides. So I just want to open it up to my fellow board members for any comments, questions, concerns.
Madam Chair, just to let you know that Dr. Stark is absent this evening.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any discussion?
This is Susan Benjamin. I have a question for Dr. Weeks. Can you hear me, Dr. Weeks?
Yes.
Okay. I'm curious because typically you would, bring something forward and make a recommendation that we approve this. And this is a receive and discuss. And I have to assume, and I could be assuming wrong, but I'm assuming that back when, and I'm assuming Diane Ray wrote the grant, and the schools compiled all the data and then she put it all together. But I'm assuming at that point, because there's a lot of time and energy spent on that, that you were supporting that at that point. And that was probably around holiday time or at winter time. Has something changed?
Has something changed with what, Mrs. Benjamin?
Well, I'm used to you, saying, bring this forward and we make a recommendation. We hope that you approve this. And then we go through a process. And this is not that. This is just a receive and discuss. And that's just different than what I'm used to when we're, moving forward or not with something.
So there is a recommended action on the board item tonight, and it reads, administration recommends the governing board receive and discuss and take possible action on an agreement with the City of Phoenix for school resource officers for the 2020-21 school year. So that is the recommendation for tonight.
Okay, so you cabinet and you are not making a statement at this point then?
Well, we have collected some data and we have that data available. In fact, we had it at the last board meeting, and the board meeting was, this item was tabled from the last meeting to this meeting. And so we do have staff responses and family responses. I think most people have seen them.
Right.
And I know that they are in the BARD book. We're certainly happy to bring that up on the screen so that we can go over those survey responses if the board would like. And that's available to us. The SRO was, the school safety grant was written with 7 SROs awarded and 2 social workers. So the social workers have been placed. We know this from the last meeting when we discussed this, and 7 social workers now are in position dependent upon whether or not the governing board approves an intergovernmental agreement between Phoenix Elementary and the City of Phoenix Police Department. And that's kind of where we are today.
Right. So you're not making a recommendation?
The recommendation by the administration is for the board to receive, discuss, and possible action on the agreement.
You've answered my question.
I have a follow-up question, just to be clear. School principals they made the decision to pursue an SRO over a social worker or a counselor. Is that correct?
When Diane Ray talked to the different school sites and collected the data, she had principals talk to their leadership teams. Some principals talk to their communities. I don't believe that any single principal by themselves made the decision to recommend an SRO. There was in collaboration of some kind at the school site.
But each of these school sites ultimately, whatever their process was, they ultimately decided of these 3 different positions, we want an SRO.
Yes, that's correct.
I have some additional comments and questions, but I want to leave the floor open in case any other board members have questions or comments.
I'm Trujillo here. I just wanted to thank Dr. Anthony for the presentation. It was a lot of things that have been on my mind. And I have just a really small question. There was a note about less weapon arrests, was it? Compared to disorderly conduct ones. I was just wondering if you could give a little bit more detail on what that kind of looks like and what that sentence really means for me?
Yes, so that was a complicated finding. They were really looking to see what was the impact and does it make schools safer. And what they found was the SROs pick up sometimes some of the big things that happen in the school. And these were, I mean, to be fair, a lot of these studies were conducted in cities like larger cities back east. And so where they have metal detectors and other things. But what the differential, so the authors who studied that were concerned about the differential impact. So they were more concerned that actually there were other offenses that were more common for SROs. Ultimately, because of the small percentage of these large incident crimes and the large percentage of these other infractions where kids were being arrested and adjudicated for. I don't know if that makes it more confusing or helpful. I think we're all I was hoping that someone had conducted a study that would say this really works if we have a school shooter or a violent activity on campus, but there's no proof that that's the case, unfortunately.
Thank you very much. It does help me grasp it a lot.
Yes, and all the studies I referenced, the PowerPoint that you have hopefully available to you after this, you could read that study yourself. It's very easy to read and available, and you might have a better grasp of it.
I definitely will. Thank you very much for the PowerPoint as well. Dr. Weeks, really quick, if I could ask how long, just in your general kind of, I don't know, guesstimation, how long that process took for this Diane to kind of gather with schools and then create the grant?
You know, I don't know with any kind of specificity. I would ask Denise. I know Denise was working with Diane this time. I do know that it's probably the largest grant that Diane worked on when she did put it together, because it's every 3 years. And it did take her quite a bit of time and a lot of additional hours. But in terms of like the time period, Denise, do you have any information on that?
I do. It was probably about 2 weeks of collaboration with principals and their leadership teams and staff members. And then I know I lost Diane for 10 days. She was behind closed doors, writing the grant. And again, just going back and forth with principals to get quotes, to get data, etc. So yeah, it was a good 2 weeks of writing this grant and gathering the needed data.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Denise, was it 2 weeks of collecting, collaborating with principals, and then another 10 days of isolation and writing? So are we really talking more about
A month? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Thank you both very much. Those were all the questions I had, Madam President. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, it might be to go ahead and bring up the survey results from the community if the board would like to see them. Staff did put a lot of time and effort putting them together.
Yeah, if you could, that would be helpful.
And this is very quick work here. Thanks, Troy. So for the benefit of the audience, here are the SRO survey results. The staff responses on the left, family responses on the right. These are specific, not to the entire district, but to the 7 campuses who were awarded the school safety grant for SROs. And just to give some background on how this works, the district writes for a grant from the Arizona Department of Education and is awarded funds for the SROs from the Arizona Department of Education. So this is not district money that is paying for the SROs. This is state grant funds. And so here on this particular slide, when we surveyed the schools, the staff responses were about 112. Community family responses were about 677. And of the responses, 83% of the staffers who responded to the survey said that they would be in support of an SRO. 3% said maybe, and 14% said no. And on the family side, the responses were 677. And that's a tricky correlation to student enrollment. I have some dirty math on that, but I'll hold that for now. Family responses at 677, 85% of those who responded said yes, and 15 said no. And I think there's probably, I think, Troy, isn't there one by school? There we go. So we'll do this one and then the next one. And so you can see kind of the responses by school for the staff. And so the highest response rate comes from Herrera School, followed by Bethune, and then Lowell, Edison, Whittier, and Capital. And Troy, if you want to move on to the next one. And if you can't hear me, just let me know. And then here are the family responses by school site. So you can see the schools that were surveyed weren't all the schools in the district, but they were the 7 schools here: Bethune, Capital, Edison, Hurd, Herrera, Lowell, and Whittier. And so that's it. Be happy to answer any questions about the survey data. If there are no questions, we can certainly pull it off the screen and get back to discussion.
Dr. Weeks, I have a question of how, so I see that we have we have over 600 parents who responded. How many parents, do you guys know how many parents make up these 7 schools? So what is the percentage of what's the response rate that we have right now?
Yeah, that's where the dirty math comes in, because we really don't know because of the anonymity of the survey, right? And so, but what we could do, and we discussed it today, is to loosely correlate this survey to the back to school survey that we did. And when we talk about the number of, let's say, students per family or per parent that responded to that survey, it loosely, and I'm going to say loosely, correlates to about 20% of the population.
Okay, and then, yeah, I can understand since there might be multiple children per family. Well, it's just like a comment here. I think that is pretty low, considering that this is such an important topic. And I understand that the turnaround on this was quick, and it's tough to do that, to get responses when we're on summer break and we have an additional challenge of being remote. But I just want to make that comment for now, and I have additional ones that I'll save for just a bit. And so the same question I have for the teacher response rate.
Troy, can you go back to the teacher response? And so that one would be a little easier to put together, but I don't have that percentage off the top of my head. I apologize for that. When we just take a look at the raw numbers of teachers who responded, or I should say staff members who responded, other than Herrera Bethune, I would say the response rate is fairly low in terms of teacher staff complement per site.
Well, and we have, how many teachers do we have in the district?
About 400.
So, and these are 7 schools. So, I mean, this math is probably not like completely accurate, but half would be 200-ish. We might have more or less. Okay, well, I think that we definitely would want to see more teacher responses on this as well. Okay, are there any other questions on the survey?
This is Lene. I have some questions and comments as well. So first, Dr. Anthony, I do want to thank you for your presentation. It was really clear, so I don't actually have any questions for you. So I appreciate that, and thank you for being here with us to kind of discuss this. So I think, Dr. Weeks, my questions are probably geared toward you. So the first is actually about the survey. I know that we got the overall results that we're looking at now, and then individual comments that appeared to correlate to maybe question 3, 4. Can you describe what the survey looked like?
Sure. So the and I will turn it over to Denise for some details. But the survey had some introductory language, and I wish we could pull that up. Do we have a copy of that survey and form as it went out to the families? Denise?
Give me a couple minutes, I'll work on that.
Yeah, so it had some introductory language, and it was a fairly simple survey that asked about the SROs, and then there were 2 places to leave comments. One place to leave comments to kind of clarify your answer, and then a second place to leave comments with any additional information that you wanted to provide.
Okay.
But we'll try to.
So, yeah,
see.
so I guess my 2 main questions surrounding it were, was there a measure of demographics at all in the survey questions?
No, this was purely a very anonymous, simple survey.
Okay, and then my second question is about the anonymous portion. So there were comments that I read through all of those comments, and there were comments indicating what other people's comments were. So it appears as though, and there was a community comment that spoke to that as well. So it sounds as though it was perhaps not anonymous. So could you describe that?
I can address that. For some reason, there was a glitch, and 18 people that took the survey, their names did appear. And we are investigating why that glitch happened, but apologize to those 18 people, but it was not anonymous for those 18. It was anonymous for everybody else. And I do have a copy of the survey if you'd like me to share it on my screen. Okay. Troy, can you allow me to share my screen?
There you go, Denise.
Thank you, Troy. So this is the survey. It was a fairly simple survey. It included the SRO responsibilities. It named the 7 schools that an SRO would be serving at in both English and in Spanish. Folks indicated which school do you work at. So this was the staff survey. And 2 very simple questions. Should Phoenix Elementary School District number 1 have SROs at the 7 schools granted an SRO? Yes, no, or maybe. Please explain your answer to number 2, why or why not, and if you have any additional comments.
That is helpful, thank you. As I was reading through comments, I saw there were quite a few comments that, particularly ones that were written in Spanish, that said that they didn't know what the survey was about, what it was asking. And then several comments that were unrelated to SROs, like going back to school plans and things like that. So I was just curious about that. So I appreciate those answers, and I do appreciate, again, the short timeline in which the survey was sent out, but would echo Dr. Diaz's concerns that percentage-wise, it's not very representative of our families or possibly teachers. And then demographically, we just don't have any idea if it's representative of our families, and that concerns me. Specifically on the survey. And I do have some questions and comments in other areas. Do you want those now, Dr. Diaz?
Sure.
Okay. So these are also for Dr. Weeks. So again, in a community comment, somebody suggested that we table until we can get more information. Could you speak to whether that's a possibility? My understanding is that it is not.
So yes, I'd like to speak to the kind of what I'd call the hurry up offense for all of this. And this year, for the first time, the State Board of Education has put a hard deadline on what they call the agreement between the district and the provider. And in our case, it's the IGA between us and the City of Phoenix PD. This is not something that had happened in years prior, but it is new for this year. And when Dr. Diaz and I spoke to ADE, and when Dr. McLaughlin spoke to ADE, and when other staff spoke to ADE, we came back with the same answer, that August 1st was the hard deadline. And if we did not have a document in place by that date, then we would forfeit our $900,000.
Okay.
Since then, there's been some talk of some flexibility, but having spoken to a grant specialist as late as 4 o'clock this afternoon, the recommendation from the department is to have either something in place or not in place by August 1st. In other words, a yes or no vote by August 1st.
Okay, and then the second question would be kind of speaking to Dr. Anthony's recommendations at the end, whether any of those options are feasible for us. So do we have the ability to provide specific training to our SROs to make a different MOU that would be more specific about responsibilities, to create a task force, to get youth representatives to weigh in?
Yeah, we do. It would require, most of this would require the governing board to have a yes vote on the IGA to form tonight, and then to begin working on modifying the IGA going forward. And so when I spoke to ADE today, I found some new information. The new information is that a year ago, under Kathy Hoffman's leadership, the department created a division called Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And I'm looking for my notes for that. There is a person by the name of Erica Maxwell, who's the associate superintendent, and she's in charge of this this division. Kathy Hoffman also put the entire school safety program under this, what they call EDI, right? The Equity, Diversity, Inclusion. And then the additional training for SROs out of this division include an equity component, a child development component, and special education component. So SROs this year are receiving training from the department in these 3 areas where they had not been receiving training in these areas in the past. The other thing to note is that the Department of Education doesn't technically receive our IGA between us and the City of Phoenix. That's our responsibility to maintain and manage. They have another form that they use to verify that we've signed on with PD, but not this form. In the SRO IGA between us and the City of Phoenix, there is a way to amend the document, and it requires work between our legal counsel and the law department of the City of Phoenix. And we have some requirements from the grant itself that must be included in the IGA between us and the City of Phoenix. But really the Department of Education, who is the grant holder, who is the releaser of funds, really leaves it up to us and the service agency, PD, to draft and, I should say, to modify and then manage the document. So it's pretty interesting stuff.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and switch to comments. I'm finished with questions. Or do you want to ask questions, Dr. Diaz?
I just have a follow-up questions to that. Dr. Weeks, when we spoke to Callie, so this was before you got clarification from John, which I haven't had an opportunity to look at that. Callie did mention that we potentially might have had until August 24th to submit our yes or our no, just because that's when they need to collect all the documents. Is that not the case anymore? Is August 1st the deadline?
According to the specialist I spoke to today, the recommendation was to hold the line on the deadline. I think that there might be some forgiveness and flexibility, but the district would be at risk if we have a document that's an IGE document that's dated past the August 1st deadline. I mean, we can go for it, right? If the board wants to, but there is some risk involved in that because of the state boards, because now we're talking about different agencies. The Department of Education is the grantor and they hold the grant funds. But this rule about August 1st doesn't come from them. It comes from the State Board of Education, and they don't meet again until August, I don't know, 16th or so, right? I don't know what the date is, but whatever their next meeting date is in August is when they would come back together again, and then whether or not they would grant an extension to the August 1st deadline retroactively, that would be our risk to bear.
Thank you. A follow-up question to that. So do we have 30 days to terminate a contract?
We do in section 2, and I'm looking at the document here. In section 2 of the IGA between us and the city of Phoenix, there is what I would call in contracting an out clause. And so it's under term and termination. It says this agreement shall commence on the effective date and shall continue until May 26th of 2021, unless otherwise terminated in accordance with this agreement. This agreement may be terminated without cause by either party upon 30 days prior written notice. And so there's a process you have to go through. You got to have a certified letter and all that. And we might even need some board action, to terminate. So there would be some logistics involved in that, but there is an out clause for this IGA.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then, so I guess this would go into comments. So Lene, do you want to provide your comments first? Do you have a?
I can. Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Well, I just wanted to point out that, so we did receive some data that was broken down by disciplinary actions at our different schools. And when I was analyzing them, I don't know if we're able to provide that for the public or not, but when I was analyzing them and thinking about a limited scope for an SRO, because it is clear that parents are wanting SROs because they feel that SROs make the school safer. Whether or not they really do, it seems like they probably don't, but parents still have this perception as well as staff. When I looked at the data, however, it looks like there was only one school that had some type of referral or disciplinary actions around weapons on campus, and that was a school that has an SRO. No other school had that, and so for me that begs the question of, again, are SROs really making our schools safer, or is it just a perception? As a mom myself, I can empathize with parents who, want to do everything in their power to make sure that their child is safe. And it is a very emotional decision, but I am a very data-driven person, and I think we have more data to show the negative implications than we have actual quantifiable data that demonstrates the positive impacts on school culture and the reduction of crime externally or internally. For me, I've always voted with our community preference. When it came to school consolidation, I voted with our community. When it came to closing or keeping schools closed due to COVID, I aligned with our community, and our community, they have said that they want SROs, which is very contradictory to my own personal opinion on SROs in campus. I don't think that we should have them. It's also contradictory to literature. But nonetheless, our community is saying that they know what's best for their local sites. Where there's a problem is we don't have enough community voices here. And we don't have the most important voice, which is students. And I don't think that I'm equipped to make a decision without hearing from students and from hearing from greater representation of all staff and parents on this issue. I also, in looking at our IGA, currently as it stands, it seems like the scope of work is really not, it's really not doing what our parents think that it's doing. It's not focused on preventing external crime from coming onto the campus. And I don't really know how it safeguards against an act of mass violence, such as a school shooting. So it focuses on things like truancy, which officers do not need to be involved in whatsoever. And it also focuses on things that social workers and school counselors and psychologists are much more equipped to handle. They've gone through training and school for that specific reason. So I would personally need to see, in addition to greater community responses, student voices, I would also need to see a drastically different IGA. That completely limits the scope of an SRO to protecting the perimeter of the school against crime that might come on campus, if that is what the parents want, and that's what the students want, and then solely limiting their scope within the schools to preventing a mass crime. But even then, with Dr. Anthony's comments about school shootings and SROs, I'm not sure how advantageous that would be. But as it stands right now, I cannot support the IGA. And then finally, I think that whatever decision we make as a district, we need to be leaders in this area of school safety and social, emotional, and mental well-being. And we must create a task force that is made up of our community, our students, our parents, experts who have researched in this field and who can give us guidance. And we need to have a robust plan that supports our social, emotional, and mental well-being of our students. I know we have things that exist right now, but we can always improve, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to mitigate here is our students getting hurt. And I think that if we focus on the root causes of disruptive behavior through other measures, we could most likely mitigate a lot of these concerns. And really be proactive in that area. So I want to leave it up to my other board colleagues to share their comments, concerns, and questions as well.
Madam Chair, I do need to let you know that Mrs. Benjamin has left the meeting.
Okay.
This is Ms. Helmy. So I'm glad you went first. Then I can just echo your best points because I agree with most of them, and they were essentially the points that I wanted to make as well. So I do find it very difficult to look at the data from our community, which is overwhelmingly in favor of having an SRO in these schools, and then speak against it. But I do really value the research on this subject. And I think that for me, our students are majority Black and Brown students, and we do have clear research that says that SROs have a negative impact long-term for those students. We don't have any contradicting research on the other side that says that there's a positive impact on safety. So to balance those two things, there isn't any balance for me. We know that it's going to have a negative impact on some of our students. We don't know if it'll have any positive impact. So that's really concerning to me. I also think that we are pretty clear on the fact that social workers, counselors, they are much better equipped to deal with almost everything that is written in that IGA. I would agree with that completely, Dr. Diaz. I'm also very much aware that we cannot use these funds for any of those positions, which is frustrating. Surprised to hear that we had our employees choose to write the grant in favor of an SRO versus a social worker, just because that's not, I feel like, what we normally hear from our community. So I didn't realize that was our decision. I hope that when we apply for the grant next time, it's purely for social workers. We know that we need more social workers in our school, and they're very well equipped to deal with many of the issues that our students are facing and that are trying to be dealt with through this IGA. So I wish that we could use those funds. I'm aware that we can't, but I also do think that we can send the message that we need more grant funding for social workers and counselors. We don't need more grant funding for police in our schools. And I think that possibly rejecting this agreement would send that message so that we can next time around find more funding for social workers. And then I think my last point is just more from a gut feeling as a teacher. I work in Maryvale. My students are 98% Black and Brown students. Just my interactions and my conversations with them, I couldn't put an SRO in my school with those students. So I don't think it's fair for me to put one in Phoenix elementary schools with our students. And that's really just like an emotional decision that I think is supported by research, but I know that I'm not a parent, but I am a teacher who works with students every day, and I wouldn't be willing to put any of my students in a position that could cause them long-term harm. I think that's it for now.
Long deep sigh. This is Carmen Trujillo, and I completely agree with both board colleagues here. I was actually hoping we could adjust the agreement to use the funds for more social workers and things like that. So to learn that we can't, it is very discouraging. I do feel like this popped up kind of quickly for a vote, so I don't feel very confident in voting on something that we don't have a lot of solid data on, especially. I just get a little concerned about the methods used, because I personally got the text message with the link on it. So I just wondered, well, anyhow, I do think I need more community information to make the right decision that I feel I was elected to represent. But I also hear that we have this deadline of, well, I heard two deadlines, August 1st and then July 30th. So if I was kind of happy to hear that we could, I mean, just the August 24th date, that might be considered, but if that is not, I guess the word used was, it would be a risk on the district. And I would have to trust the process on taking that risk, because that's the position that we're all in right now. So if we do have to make a decision on it, I don't feel like I have enough information to make to vote in favor of it because I don't feel like it would be the cost benefit. In my own head, it seems like the cost, it would cost our kids more emotionally and long term than it would benefit them. So thank you all for informing me and answering all the questions I had going on in my head this evening. Thank you. That was all I have, Madam President. Thank you.
Yeah. I guess one last comment I have. So to be clear, if we're voting tonight with what we currently have in place, I have to vote no. I agree with Ms. Trujillo that it is worth the risk to take our time and gather the additional student responses and amend the IGA. And if we can do that by or before August 21st or 24th, and we still see the overwhelming support for this, even from our students and a very, very different IGA, then perhaps we could move forward with this. But I will have to vote no if we are voting on what we have today.
Madam Chair, if the board votes no today, we're done with this process for the next 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the only option you would have in terms of, to Mr. Heal's point, the risk would be to table it again.
I know that that's very inconvenient for our community and for our board and for our cabinet. But quite frankly, we shouldn't even be having this discussion a few days before it's due. This discussion should have happened months ago. And I think we can all take responsibility for a lack of action. It was partly because we had our heads trying to wrap around COVID and what was happening with our schools and our students. So this wasn't on our radar. But it is an important decision, and we can't just make it based on a few responses, proportionally speaking, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I would agree. I would say we've absolutely been all hands trying to figure out how we were going to finish off last year, and then spending the summer trying to figure out how we were going to get him back to school this year. And now we are in a position where school starts through distance learning on August 6th. So we've got some pretty hard milestone dates that are coming up. We have August 6th is when we start our distance learning. On the 17th, the learning labs begin. And then of course on October 12th, we have another milestone that we have to address. So there's a lot going on for our teachers, for our kids, with the learning environment between let's say now and December.
I completely understand, and I think tabling it would put additional pressure on the community, and that's really unfortunate. But it sounds as though the community democratic process is going to end here tonight if we don't move forward with tabling it. And I think to silence our community without allowing the process to move forward could be damaging in trust in and of itself. Again, I don't support SROs. I support the voices of our community. And I would personally be okay with tabling it, bringing it back, but I understand that this is also, we have to understand this is going to put additional pressure on principals to make sure that their parents are responding and their staff is responding. And then teachers are going to have to somehow incorporate a survey into their lessons. So I understand that that is going to take time, and then we're going to have to come back again and discuss the findings. It's not convenient and it's not ideal, but this is where we're at. So we can decide not to move forward with the process and end it, or at least give the community a chance to fully respond.
You know, I have a question for Dr. Anthony, Dr. Diaz, and that is, what sort of resources would ASU have for the district in terms of, let's say, developing, first of all, developing, I suppose, grade level specific? Would it be qualitative, quantitative? Would it be a mixed survey? And then, of course, one for the adults and one for the staff, one for the community. So what sort of resources is there available through ASU for this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I had told Dr. Diaz before that I'd be happy to serve on any kind of task force that you have, since I'm committed to this issue. But we could put together survey, both quantitative and qualitative. It would be best, honestly, to get the largest representation of parents and youth as possible. So it would be really important, I think, to try to get. I would be bent towards really administering a quantitative survey that could be done relatively easily through SurveyMonkey or something like that. But that would get a broader cross section of parents.
What about the students?
Yeah, so students actually are pretty responsive to surveys. So that's what I do primarily, is interview youth. And they're much better with technology than the rest of us. So if we created something that they can respond to via technology without people, without having to identify themselves, I think we could get a good response.
What about grade levels? Which grade levels do you think would be best for this?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, the kids are getting older and more mature at younger ages, but I would say probably 4th grade and up.
Mm-hmm.
So kids are getting developmentally, 4th graders can understand it probably, or have some ideas. 5th grade, definitely middle school. Definitely, I think we'd want to hit the middle school group.
And so is this something that you believe can be developed, administered, analyzed, and reported by August 24th, or let's say August 23rd?
That I'm not 100% sure of, just because some of the barriers we have are folks just trying to get their kids back to school and trying to figure out how the hybrid learning is going to work. And so I don't think it's the top priority of a lot of people, a lot of parents right now, even though they'd be invested in giving their information. I think we could try. I don't know if it would. I think part of the reason you got the response that you got to the original survey was because it was in the middle of when people are, trying to figure out what's going on. And this, frankly, isn't probably much better of a time because school's about to start. But we could try.
We could try. And so what would be a normal time period to survey staff? Because you would want both support and certificated staff, right? Not just one group of employees. You'd want to do all your employees. So, and then something that's specific to the community, mm-hmm. and then something that's specific to let's say 4th graders and up. What, under normal conditions, how long would you say that survey work would take?
In terms of developing it, or in terms of how long we'd want it to be open for people to
out the door? Yeah, you have to have it. You have to have it sit out there for a while.
Yes.
But going back to the development, the administration, the deliverance, the calculations, and then the reporting. If there was a normal cycle, about how long would you need?
Yeah, so typically it would take us a couple of weeks to put the surveys together and make sure they're asking the right questions. So we'd want feedback from parents, or I'd want feedback from parents and kids about what are the right questions to ask. And then another 2 to 3 weeks to analyze it. One good thing is the survey data that we have, or our systems that we use, like SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics, help analyze the data pretty quickly. So that part's not particularly time consuming. But I think what my concern would be is response rates, given the time frame that we have. So we're right in the time frame where most parents are trying to figure out, do I send my kids to school? What's the learning going to look like? All of that. But I think it's not a lot better than the last time we did the survey. So unfortunately, I think we'd probably need more time.
Yeah, our original plan was to spend this school year and to take a deep dive with regards to this, because we felt that we would probably want to begin after things settle down a little bit.
Sure.
And then to take the time to do a really good, do some really good survey work, because if you want to do a good job, you don't really want to rush it.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And you're seeing evidence of that tonight, right? And so if you want to do a good job, you don't want to rush it. The problem the board's up against is that if they vote down the IGA tonight, then we could spend the next 3 years doing this work, and that's fine. I mean, you would get really good data if you took 3 years to do this work, right? And then at the same time, you could begin to develop and embed other social emotional systems in place, to Dr. Diaz's point, right? Because then you could survey which social emotional systems would be best for kids along the way. And then at the end of 3 years, you'd have a pretty good package.
Yes, and I think to the point that other board members were making, I think it would be a good investment to look at other things besides the SROs. So could we get funding for social workers, counselors, or other behavioral health supports that could do the work that we have determined needs to be done to make the schools safer?
Yeah, and nobody really knows how the state's gonna, what the state's gonna do between now and 3 years from now.
Right.
All we're really talking about is the school safety grant procedure, but there's lots of other opportunities from the state that may come along the way as an outcropping of the virus, and
Great.
mitigate the social emotional consequences, the negative impacts of the virus. So there might be some opportunities that we're not seeing today that might come up tomorrow, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we're trying to do administratively is to give you governing board members all the information that we have, right? And it feels rushed. It feels like hurry up offense. It feels like the shoulda, woulda, couldas, and all the other conversations that could have gone on. I would say that this idea that the COVID hit in March kind of derailed everything, and continues to derail things today. So I don't know, I'm with you, Dr. Anthony. I don't know the value of the data that we would get out of our community, our students, and our staff in the next, 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
We tried to really push this thing through. It would really take, I would say, almost a year's worth of work to have the community forums that are necessary to really hear voice. You can't just do this stuff all digitally. You have to get in front of people at some point.
Yes.
Conversations with them. That's my belief. So.
Yes, and in my research, doing focus groups that represent a diverse group on the topic is a great way to really complement the quantitative data that you collect. But it takes time.
So what I'm hearing, Dr. Anthony, is a couple of weeks to develop a survey, and then 2 or 3 weeks, I guess, to administer and analyze data.
Mhm.
So we're up to 4 or 5 weeks. And then, so probably 4 or 5 weeks.
Mhm.
Okay. So at least that gives board members something to look at. And I don't mean to hog all the time here, so I'll turn it back over to you, Dr. Diaz.
So 4 to 5 weeks, that would put us past August 24th, right? I don't know what date we're at right now.
It'd be very.
So I guess the decision we have to make today as a board is, I'd say we're either voting to not continue the grant or to not sign this IGA with the city of Phoenix. In that case, I would want as an immediate next step, a plan from administration to share, what are we going to replace this with? What does the task force look like? What is the timeline? Because we want to make sure that the root causes are being proactively addressed within our schools and that students and parents and teachers still feel safe. So I guess that's one option, or the board can table this and we can kind of rush the process, apply this pressure to our schools and our teachers to get these survey responses and try and get a new IGA. But the board, the State Board of Education might say you've missed the window of opportunity. We're not going to extend this grant. That's correct, right?
Yeah, and I don't know why we're getting a lot of feedback, but the board could vote yes on the IGA to form tonight. And then the immediate next steps would be to work with Dr. Anthony and the team from ASU to develop the survey work. And then to begin to use that data to begin to change the IGA that was approved to form, and to bring a modified IGA back to the governing board at a later date, somewhere later in the year, with changes that are reflective of what the community and the students had to say. So there is a third option.
This is Carmen Trujillo. I just was thinking, and I wanted to, what's the word Miss Alma uses, to echo something. And I do think that part of the process is not just on the district as far as responsibility, but I guess it would be the city, or however this exchange happens. So I do think a rejection does say something as far as adjusting how these processes work. And I mean, I also had the thought too that there's officers that are just assigned to our neighborhoods that our schools are in. So it's not like they won't be anywhere around. I had that thought too, as far as like, in my world of social work, we look a lot for spaces that are double billing is going on. So I was happy to hear the community comment about, I guess, what either that person thought of, I guess a school resource office has better training or whatever. So that kind of helped clear that up in my head. But yeah, if we're gonna put pressure anywhere, I feel like it should be elsewhere and not our principals and our families right now. So I just wanted to throw those little two ideas in there before we came to a decision, and then lost sleep on it later on, because I do feel like we do have pops in Central Phoenix, very many places, because I live down here. And I just also feel like the data that we do have, I don't want to be dismissive of it at all, but I do immediately have to think about, where did that data come from? Is it our families that I know for sure that even I live around that don't really use technology, that don't have phones? I know there's still people we can't communicate with that are we're trying to just see which learning method they want this year. So there's just so many things that come to mind again with trying to reach our families especially with the subject of officers that haven't always treated people that look like me in the best form. So the more I listen and the more I think about all of this, I do feel it's like the city's responsibility and our system's responsibility to take a better handle of this process, just to better serve us and our kids and our parents. It shouldn't be the other way around in my head right now. So I'm just thinking, and I had to say all those things out loud for you guys to hear. Yeah, I got my entire thought out. Thank you.
Is there any additional discussion? Okay, well, it says take possible action. So Dr. Weeks, if we wanted to table this, would that be a different motion that we would vote on, or are we voting on whether or not to agree? Is it like, is that the only?
Yeah, I would.
I'm at 3%. I'm gonna just run to the other room. Give me 30 seconds. Okay, sorry about that.
No worries. So Lene and I do a nice job of double teaming parliamentary procedure for this. So I'm going to recruit you, Lene, but I believe that if the board has received and discussed and takes no action, then we just move on to the next item. And this is left kind of like a hanging chad, and it's not resolved. Then we would want to communicate some kind of next steps to the community on what we're going to do here, right? Which might include working with Dr. Anthony to at least develop some kind of survey, knowing that this academic climate probably isn't conducive to receiving the best result, but it would at least be it would be a next step. And I appreciate you, Dr. Anthony, for at least entertaining the idea that you would partner with us on this. So thank you very much. The board could call for a vote, at which time what you would do is you would kind of read the the recommended action, and you would call for a vote, and you would have a yay or a nay, and then that would be the end of it. If it's a yay, we would move forward with signing the IGA with PD. If it's a nay, we would move forward with telling ADE and PD that we're going to forego the grant and the IGA.
I think that it is best to not take action and have all those other measures in place, and then come back and take action before the 24th.
I mean, we can do the best we can. And then in terms of this risk of the August 1st deadline, we just take the risk. And if ADE comes back and they say, well, you risked badly, right? Then, then it is what it is. I mean, then the no action really defaults to ADE telling us how this plays out.
Are there any board members who have a preference to vote rather than to table?
I guess my only question is if a month from now or August 24th, we come back and we don't have any better survey results, we don't have any more, we don't have any better information, then where are we?
I think we're at the end of the line then. Right. I think at some point there really is going to be a hard line, whether it's August 1st or August 24th, depending on your interpretation of all of this. Right. And Carmen, you are correct. Technically, it's the 30th. I keep saying August 1st, but technically ADE would like to have this thing by, tomorrow. Right. Yeah. So you are correct. Yeah. And so with that logic, I would say you probably want to back it off to the 23rd for a governing board meeting, right? Whatever day that falls. So, and of course we can't do work on the weekends. The state doesn't allow it. So if we did the next steps, then Dr. Anthony would work with us for these specific schools, unless the board wanted to survey the entire district. You see what I mean? That's the problem with being limited on time. You kind of limit. You have to prioritize and focus your resources. If you had more time, then what you would do is you would probably want to just survey the whole district and get a feel for the four corners of the district on how all families feel, and then you could pull out specifically those schools that were awarded the SROs, right? And I'll leave it to you, Dr. Anthony, to let me know whether or not that's a good idea. But it seems to me the board would like to hear from the community, right? And so, there's some decision points that probably need to be made. And that's why doing a rush job, I don't know that it's going to get you what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Yes, I have that concern. And my other concern is that part of the reason people respond the way they do is because they don't know very much about this issue. So if I were a parent and just a parent and not a researcher, I would probably listen to the news and think, wow, that seems like a good idea. Let's put a police officer in the school so my kid can feel safe. And I wouldn't even know what was behind that. The average person I've talked to about this issue has no idea that this is a big issue. And so I think we'd have to inform people of the pros and the cons before we ask them these questions, because otherwise they don't really even know what they're responding to, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know that creating a reliable survey does take time. I don't know. I guess with all that being said, it doesn't sound like even if we went through this process within the next 25 days, that we're going to be able to get the information that we would actually need. So it sounds like it's probably better to take a longer approach here. And perhaps that does mean that we have to look inside of our budget to replicate the model we have at Capitol. but again, we would need data on that. We would need data to understand whether or not there have been external threats to justify spending that money. But I think that's the long-term approach here. So I think we should probably vote tonight. Does anybody have opposition to voting tonight? Ms. Trujillo, do you have any opposition to voting tonight?
No, Madam President, I don't, but I just want a clarification. You mean voting on the IGA or voting to table it?
Voting on the IGA.
No, I am a participant.
Okay. All right. Well, then with that, do I have a motion to approve the agreement with the City of Phoenix for school resource officers?
May I make a motion to reject the agreement?
So we're voting on whether or not to reject the agreement?
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine with me, Dr. Weeks. Does that work?
You can amend what we have drafted here.
It just says take possible action. So I feel like the possible action could be approved, but it could also be reject. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, then I move to reject the agreement with the City of Phoenix for school resource officers.
Okay. Can I have a second, please?
I'm sure you'll hear. I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, so with that, the motion passes to reject the IGA with the City of Phoenix. We'll go ahead and move on to item D, board reports and requests.
Well, Dr. Diaz, I feel like you should make it, but I would like to see the school safety plan.
Yeah, so I think as an immediate next step, we would need to have a report that describes what we're going to do to replace the SRO program to mitigate any safety concerns that our parents have. And then long-term, what does that task force look like for social, emotional, and mental well-being for our students? And so actually, I don't know if that's a report or a future agenda item.
We're certainly going to have to take a look at this and get back to you on what this is going to look like.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So it might be a report, it might be a future agenda item. We'll just have to take a look.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think at some point it will need to be a future agenda item. I just don't know if there's like a step before that where we review a report.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so what we would want to do is to take a look at this, take a look at some of the options within the capacity of our own budget, or the limitations of our own budget.
Okay.
We'll do that. Well, we can begin working on that.
Okay, and Dr. Anthony, as we move forward, not to put you on the spot, but you kind of already said it, do we have the permission to communicate with you around this topic?
Yes, absolutely. And we also have students who are interested in working in this area who would be able to help with survey development and data collection. And it would be a great project, thesis project for a student or dissertation project for one of our students. But yes, I'd be happy to serve on task force and try to help develop in this area.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time.
Oh, and Madam Chair, I forgot to mention, I did send the governing board an email not too long ago with a budget estimate for private unarmed security at the 7 sites at about a $200,000 price tag.
Right. Yeah.
So that preliminary work has already been sent to the board. I forgot to mention that.
Yeah, that's pretty hefty. So we'd want to see what all of our options are.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Are there any additional board reports or requests? All right. Are there any future agenda items? Okay. So with that, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 7:55 p.m.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for having me. I think you have my contact information and we'll be in touch.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony. It was a pleasure to get to know you tonight.
Oh, thank you so much. And feel free to share the PowerPoint with anyone you feel it's helpful. I don't have any concerns about you just sharing the resources.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate that.
Absolutely.